Okay, this is Harold Lanier from Lanier Bee Barn back with another video. We want to talk real briefly about some options for feeding. As far as feeding our bees, I recommend when you get a new package or you get a nuke that when you install them you feed them for 1 or 2 weeks because at that point they've come from another geographical location. They've got to find where the grocery store is near them. So in that meantime, if you'll give them some food, then they'll be off to a better start. So this, from a sugar water standpoint, these are some options that you can use in terms of feeding. So we have just pure cane, white cane sugar, and we mix it in a 1-to-1 ratio by weight. So a gallon of water weighs 8 pounds, so you would mix a gallon of hot water to 8 pounds of sugar. Now, I find that the hot water out of your sink works just fine. Some people like to boil the water on the stove to get it hot. You don't really need to. It works just fine for our purposes. If you do want to use to boil water on the stove, do not boil the sugar water once you have the sugar in it, because it creates something called hydrofluorocarbons, HFCs, that is just not good for the bee's stomach. It kind of gives them an upset stomach, so that's not good. So you can heat the water, then get it off the stove and just mix it up and have it ready to go. 1-to-1 by weight is typically what we use here. However, a lot of northern climates, they deal with a lot with moisture up there. And up north, they mix theirs for the winter, they mix it with a 2-to-1. So they have 2 parts sugar, 1 part water. That way it reduces the amount of moisture inside the hive. But in terms of delivering this then to our bees, we've got several options. We have some people will call these an in-hive feeder or a frame feeder, but its true term is called a division board feeder. So these are basically a plastic reservoir. This one holds about 1 gallon, and they have in them little plastic ladders. So then as the bees will go down in the top, they'll go down in these ladders and they're able to come back out, and you don't have a big pile of bees dead in the bottom of these. Now, bees do die sometimes in there because they get, a lot of them get on top of one another, but you can't help that. But this fits inside the hive. I use these a lot whenever we're starting up a nuke, and that way we've got food right here for them. It's easy for them to get to. And then as they build out and you're ready to go to your next box, then you can take these out. So here we have this one is made for a deep hive body. Here's one made for a medium. So you can use whichever size is appropriate for your hive. Another option that you find a lot of times with startup kits is what we call a Boardman feeder, and these basically have the option of creating a jar, whether it's a pint like this or a quart, a lid with holes in it, and that's going to fit into the front of the hive like so. The bees will come in and out of that. Now the problem sometimes with these is, in my opinion and others, it's just not a good option for summertime when we're in the dearth, because other bees from other hives can notice that there's food over here and there's a potential to incite robbing.
What is a dearth, Harold?
So the dearth period is where we have no more nectar flow. So in Georgia, where we are, the nectar flow generally stops around the 1st or 2nd week of June. After that, for the most part, we don't have any flowering plants and trees like that out in most countryside. Now, if you live in a neighborhood, you may have a whole bunch of pretty flowers and all that kind of stuff going on, so your nectar flow may go a bit longer than where we are. But after that, for the whole summer, there's not a lot blooming, and there's no food for them to get. They get extremely protective of their stores that they already have. So this is, in my opinion, is not a great option for that period. You can use this to get a hive started when they don't have much competition or when there's a nectar flow. But this is actually a very good option to give them some water if you wanted to put water here and have water available for them. So this is called a Boardman feeder. Now I want to take a look at what we call a Hive Top Feeder. And this is basically a plastic bin that sits right on top of a hive body. It has a place for the bees to come up inside here, and then they come up and cascade over the top of the plastic, which is then surrounded by this mesh. So the bees go in and eat, and they can come back out, and you can put about 2 gallons of feed in here, which gives you a long time. So like in the summertime, especially if you're going to go on vacation, this is a really good option for something like that. One caution that I would tell you, do not put this, put your inner cover on top of this and then your outer cover, because remember that little notch that's in the top? They can come right inside here and go inside, and then a lot of bees will drown. So be sure if you're going to use that inner cover to keep it beneath there, although you don't even really need it, but keep it down beneath that. That way that'll keep them from coming up through that inner part and drown. So these are a great option for summertime feeding, or for any time you need to feed a lot of feed and maybe you're not going to be around for a little bit. Another option is what we call community feeding or open feeding. I like to do this a lot to provide a bulk assistance to the bees. Usually I do this early spring before the nectar flow really kicks in, because after the winter, when they start building up, in our part of the country, they start building up very strong even in January. January, February, bees are building up real strong. Our swarm season starts in mid-March. So because of that, that tells you that this hive is already built up before early to mid-March. And at that point, if they didn't have any stores left over from winter, then they're going to starve to death. So what I like to do is give them food in these big 5-gallon buckets. Now there's some folks that'll say this is a bad thing to do because bees will drown. Also it's a bad thing because they're spread diseases and things like that, and maybe sharing, you know, you're feeding your neighbor's bees. But I'd rather feed a few of my neighbor's bees and make sure mine have food. As far as the spreading diseases go, the bees meet in the same flowers and nectar sources everywhere out in the field anyway. This is not going to help, you know, hurt that. So anyway, so this I can feed 5 gallons at a time. I usually, in my yard, I may have 6 or 8 of these scattered about in a big area where I've got just nothing but bucket feeders. Now, if you take a look at this very carefully, you'll see how this works. So you'll find some items on the internet where people have drilled a hole right inside here. Okay, and if you do that, then chances are you are going to have some bees that can drown, because in this area right here a lot of bees can get in there. Okay, now so if you drill holes here, that you're going to have some dead bees. But in addition to that, I find that whenever it rains, this fills up with rainwater and they don't seem to want to come to it much anymore. So what I do instead is I drill holes right here, just barely under this rim. And in fact, when I take my drill bit, which is 5/64, I will actually run it right on this lip right here and drill those holes, just a bunch of holes all the way around. So you want those holes to be very close to this rim so that when you snap the lid back on, as you can see, it covers those holes and you can't see them. They are below this rim. So when you invert the bucket, it's going to drip a little bit, but it will cause a vacuum here. And once that vacuum happens, the nectar, the sugar water is going to be in there, plus the bees can come suck it right out of those holes as they need it. But this gives you a quick way to do a lot of feeding. Now, what I'm going to show you is just how I do it, and it's not really a true 1-to-1 exact ratio. You don't have to get too technical about it, but with a 5-gallon bucket, I'll put a 25-pound bag of sugar, just dump that in there, and then fill the bucket up, the remainder with that hot water. I use a paint stirring tool on the end of a drill, and I just drill it up, and then that has enough volume and velocity to mix that up really good. So when I put that 25-pound bag of sugar in here and then fill it up with the hot water, this is what I use on the end of a drill to just stir that up really good. Mixes it really well. Pro tip here, do not put your drill on high or you'll be wearing a lot of this sugar water, so don't do that. So we have some smaller ones as well. Either of these will work just fine, but for a beginner, for basics, for getting out there with just 1 or 2 colonies, you will not need something like this. But once you start growing and you have maybe 6 or 8 or 10 colonies, this is a great way, a very quick way to put a lot of food out there And one of the things that I like about the outside feeding is that I believe that it helps reduce robbing. Because when you have, every colony has food inside that they're feeding from, the other colonies also know that. But if you have this food that's out in another remote area, then they know to go there for their food as opposed to trying to go steal from their neighbors. That's just my 2 cents worth on feeding.